Hey, everybody. Great to see you all. I'm Bob Cargill, President-elect of AMA Boston, and want to thank you all for being here today. I'm very excited to have this opportunity. We're thrilled AMA Boston is to be hosting this event, kicking off our DEI event series that we're hoping to host once a quarter. And at AMA Boston, just want to underscore that we want to create a space for our community to be able to connect and speak freely about important topics with regard to DEI, while also learning from DEI experts about how we can grow in these areas to become more inclusive, more knowledgeable. And we are excited to be partnering with other AMA chapters like today from across the country, like AMA Triangle, like AMA Nashville. And we are so delighted and hope to hear from the AMA community at large about the challenges they are facing. And we want to provide people with the opportunity to connect and to learn from one another about these DEI topics. Today, in celebration of Pride Month, this event will be focusing on the topic of creating inclusive workplaces for LGBTQ plus employees. And we'll be hearing from a panel of guest speakers, experts, Rebecca, Laramey, Misty, in about 30 seconds once I wind things down here, and Misty will take over. I want to make a point before we get started, a very good point, that we are donating half of all the proceeds from today's event to the Trevor Project, a nonprofit organization focused on suicide prevention efforts among lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning youth. And personally, I want to thank Chris Goodnow, our VP of Programming, and Genevieve Brown, VP of DEI at AMA Boston, for helping to put this event together. We are very, very excited to kick things off. Personally, I'm honored and thrilled, and it's going to be a ridiculously awesome discussion. I know that. So I'm going to turn things over to Misty Wilson, AMA Triangle past president. She'll introduce the panelists and she'll start the conversation. Misty.
Thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate that. Such a warm welcome. Hey, everybody. I'm super excited to be here with y'all. I'm very passionate about DEI. I think it's such an important conversation to have, such an important topic to talk about, especially within our AMA communities. And so I am more than delighted to introduce you to our two amazing panelists today. So first up, she's the founder and president of Sanborn Diversity Training Solutions. She offers LGBTQ plus cultural competency training for businesses, nonprofits, and public sector entities. Prior to launching her career as a DEI trainer, she practiced law for 17 years, which is incredible. And she's forever passionate about human rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The one, the only Rebecca Sanborn.
Thank you, Misty.
Absolutely. Welcome, Rebecca. And then next up, with just shy of 40 years in the advertising game, he's an industry veteran and the creative mind behind countless integrated campaigns as the EVP of Insights and Engagement at his ad agency, GS&F in Nashville. He's a huge fan of Insights and thoroughly guides paid, owned, and earned media to create meaningful audience connections. And he's extremely passionate about supporting the advancement of arts as well as advertising as a whole. A huge AMA welcome to our ad rock star, Laramey Lawson. Woo! Welcome, Laramey. All right, so to kick things off, so today we're really talking about LGBTQ, the community. As Bob mentioned, it is Pride Month, so really focusing on what that means, both for marketers, but also for us as employees and business owners. And so to kick us off, I really want to start with a very basic question to kind of set the stage. Why should marketers care about DEI? Why is it important for us? Laramey, Rebecca?
Absolutely, I can take that. Well, I think one of the most important things to realize is that the LGBTQ plus market is currently the fastest growing consumer market in the US. It's on target to grow rapidly as we're seeing Gen X and millennials really start to identify in ways that previous generations haven't. We're expecting 21% of Gen Z to identify in this group and 16% of millennials. So that will put us on track for about 7.1% overall individuals who identify as LGBTQ plus, and that's up from 5.6% in 2020. I think another really important stat to keep in mind is that they bring with them over $1 trillion in buying power. And it's often very much underserved when we look at the fact that this is probably going to grow to about 1.4 trillion very quickly, but currently it's only 1.8 to 2% of all mainstream media ad spending against this particular category. So I think that's a huge thing that any company should be focusing on, because you're really missing the mark if you're not addressing and realizing the importance of this audience.
Absolutely. That's a great point, and totally speaking to my data brain there, Laramie. I love this stat. That's huge. And 21% of Gen Z said that's incredible. That's
Right.
awesome.
Just to piggyback on what Laramie said, and those are incredible stats. I think, as Laramie pointed out, the LGBTQ community is looking for brands and for companies to be inclusive of us as a community. The LGBTQ community is very loyal. As consumers, they are loyal to the brands and the companies that are loyal to them. Mm-hmm. And I think the more, as Laramie said, the more younger populations are ready to come out of the closet, they're looking for that equality and that inclusion in advertising and all other aspects of society as well.
I think the other thing too, also to keep in mind, and I've been in this industry, as she mentioned, almost 40 years as a gay man, and one of the things that I've noticed is 20 years ago, it was okay just to slap a pride flag on your website or on your ad, but that just doesn't work anymore. I see so many companies jumping into June as the Pride Month, which is great, but it's got to be more than just checking a box. And, June for Pride has gotten really, really crowded. So it's even harder to really stand out in that space. But I think the thing that brands sometimes forget is, I mentioned that huge buying power that they bring, and they don't just purchase items in June. It's 12-month, 365-day commitment. And I think brands need to really realize that certainly the community appreciates the visibility that they provide in June, but it's really not just a June initiative. It's a year-long initiative.
That's a really good point. I mean, we wouldn't, marketers wouldn't market to mothers only around Mother's Day, or Correct. To women only around Women's History Month. So I think that's a really good point, and it makes the marketing seem more authentic when it is year round.
Because that's honestly what the audience, the consumers, LGBTQ plus, are expecting, that it be authentic, that it have a connection, and that it have continuity.
Completely agree. Such good points there. I mean, especially the way that you just put it about, you wouldn't only focus and market to women in Women's History Month, right? I mean, that completely puts it into perspective. So with that being said, how can marketers create campaigns that are authentic? What do those look like throughout the year? Where should a marketer start with that?
Rebecca, you want to?
I'll jump in. I think, the rainbows and the rainbow imagery is wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I love signing on my Facebook and seeing all the logos change to rainbows. I think it's important, though, representation matters. And I think it's important to, in addition to the kind of the graphics and the rainbow imagery, to also be showing LGBTQ people as well, and showing LGBTQ people in regular everyday situations, with positive interpersonal connections, that an LGBTQ consumer can look and say, oh, okay, this reminds me of me and my family. Also remembering intersectionality as well. The LGBTQ community is very rich in other dimensions of diversity. So you want to be thinking as well of ethnicity and race, disability status, other dimensions of diversity to bring into those campaigns as well.
And just to kind of tack on to what Rebecca is saying, 66% of this audience say that they do not see their lifestyle represented in advertising. So I think, certainly that is a lot of what needs to take place. But I also feel like, it also is based on a sound research, really understanding your market and how your product or brand will interact and intersect with this audience. One thing that was very encouraging for me, and I'd imagine it was maybe 6 to 8 years ago, could be longer. I have a hard time keeping up with time anymore, it seems. But a syndicated research tool that's used very extensively within the marketing industry is GfK MRI. And MRI started to add a GLBTQ identity within their demographic profile, which I thought was very impressive for them, but also very important for brands to be able to tap into that in a way that wasn't there before and really understand how they can interact with these individuals, not only from a demographic standpoint, but also psychographically, how their brand could really match up the needs of this very important audience.
Absolutely.
Can I add something onto that, Misty?
Yeah, please do.
In continuation of what Laramey said of thinking of the needs of the audience, is it okay to mention a brand name, or is that not, should I not mention a brand name?
No, go for it.
Okay, great. So I believe it was Citi. Yes, Citibank did something really cool with their true name campaign for their credit cards, where they allowed transgender and non-binary consumers to put their true chosen name on their card, even if it didn't happen to be their legal name, because sometimes it's very hard to get your legal name changed. There's a lot of hurdles there. So that was something that Citi did that actually saw it was beyond marketing to seeing a need that the community had, and they met that. And that was impressive to me anyway.
That is such a beautiful sentiment. I love that, because you're right. It's absolutely more than marketing. It's something that the community really needs and would really appreciate, whether Citi actually talks about it vocally or they do a commercial about it or not. That's something that would be extremely meaningful for the consumers. That's huge. And speaking of that, I'm curious, from both of your perspectives, what brands are doing it right? Or what campaigns have you seen where you're like, yep, I love that. That's perfect.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of brands out there that are doing it right. There's so many, I'm having a hard time like really focusing in on one particular brand. I think the other thing too that's very important is, even outside of their campaign, how committed are they to this audience? And one thing that has really gained in importance is the HRC index, which is the Human Rights Campaign Index, which really is a very thorough analysis and ranking for companies that, really goes beyond just the advertising, marketing, and just everything that they do as a brand and as an organization. And it's very encouraging to me to see so many brands really striving to get that 100 on that index. And you can always visit HRC, the website, and you can see those brands and how they rank. It's just been very impressive to me living in Nashville, Tennessee, which of course, is the South, and to see some of the local brands here who are headquartered here really work over time to get their ranking up. And it's just very impressive and rewarding for me just to see the commitment that companies are making to this particular audience.
That's an excellent point about HRC and companies really sort of getting their house in order before they even delve into marketing to the LGBTQ community. What are the things that I would want to know as a member of the LGBTQ community and an educator? What are the company's policies around discrimination, around harassment? Are they including sexual orientation and gender identity in that? What are their leave policies, their family leave policies? Do they have trans inclusive health care? These kinds of things. And as Laramey said, you can get a sense of that from the HRC index. So it's like, we're not just putting this in a silo, that this is just about the advertising. It's part of the culture of the company. And then again, it's coming back to authenticity that will make the marketing more authentic.
Right. And especially with these younger audiences, they are much more focused in and really want to know a brand's purpose, their social purpose, what they're really all about, as opposed to just what they're putting out in the market. So I think it's going to become more and more vital for these brands to be authentic throughout their organization, and to not, just expect that if they do a few things to support this audience, that it's going to be enough.
Absolutely. So I love that y'all mentioned the HRC. That's something that I'm learning about and hearing about for the first time, which is awesome. It sounds like that's potentially a really good resource for people to get examples of companies doing it, quote unquote, right? Yes. Or companies that are really great at marketing in that way, or really great allies for the community. How does one become a part of that index?
As far as I know, you just apply as a brand. And again, there are criteria that you have to meet in order to achieve 100 on the index. You can certainly, start at a number and grow. And I've seen a lot of companies do that. HRC is just one way I think that you can really understand the depth and the commitment that brands are making against this community. The other thing too, I would mention, as Rebecca had also alluded to, it's a great resource. And when I said earlier that you really need to do your research, it doesn't have to be primary expensive research. There are a number of resources out there that can help you truly understand this group, because we label it as one audience, but within this audience there are very different ways that you would want to approach or present yourself, based on the individuality of each one of them. Fortunately, we are all sort of together, but there are differences, even though we're all together under the LGBTQ plus, audience.
Absolutely. Excellent point there. And I love that you're talking about, again, the data aspect of things, and there's being so many different avenues to get that research and understand the makeup of your audience, as marketers should be. I'm curious, from an AMA standpoint, a lot of times our chapter leaders really want to know who our audience is within the AMA, right? Like who is really making up our membership. Is it appropriate to create a questionnaire asking about sexuality and sending it out to our audiences? Or how would you go about that? Just finding demographics to understand potentially the LGBTQ audience that we have within the AMA?
Personally, I think it would be appropriate. We do a biannual survey at our agency that really dives into the makeup of our team. You know, one of the things that we always say is what makes you, you makes us, us. And so in order for us to understand the you, we do this biannual survey that includes gender identity, sexual orientation, race, neurodiversity. I mean, it gets very, very deep into what the makeup of our team is. But we feel like we need that to really understand how we are doing against these markets, what work needs to be done, how we can support these individuals. And it's been a very good tool for us. You know, currently at GS&F, we're about 10% LGBTQ plus, which is a very, very rewarding for someone like me that's been in the industry for a long time. But again, you know, I know you mentioned earlier, Misty, that you just love the data. And I think that is very important, because not only is it important for you to be able to measure where you are and where you need to be, but also too, you know, looking at companies is sometimes the data is what can really move the needle for them to understand what they're missing out on. So I feel like, from my vantage point, and I don't know, I'm not the AMA expert, but I feel like it would be a very rewarding and interesting thing to do.
I'm not part of AMA, obviously, but just as a LGBTQ educator, I think that would be highly appropriate to be getting that demographic information.
Mm-hmm.
If something's important enough to talk about, it's important enough to measure.
Right.
I would just add, and maybe this goes without saying, or maybe it doesn't, but when you're asking those questions, to be sure to give as wide a range as possible of options, and to also leave a space for something else. If someone wants to self-identify their sexual orientation or gender identity, if they feel that the labels on the form don't really fit them.
Mm-hmm. And certainly it's 100% anonymous, right? I mean, we don't track it back to individuals, but it does give us a holistic view of our entire team, so that we're making sure that we're connecting with them, you know, in a way that is meaningful for them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for that. I appreciate it. And I kind of, as we're talking about this, you know, Rebecca, to your point, creating as much variety and as many options as possible, one really important thing to add to this entire conversation is the idea of language, right? And thinking about the different words and the different descriptions that we can use. I'm wondering if y'all have a favorite resource for language that marketers could use.
Again, I would refer to HRC. I think they do a very good job with that. You know, that has been something I feel like personally has really been driven by the younger generation. You know, just really kind of putting a stake in the ground and saying, you know, I don't go with the convention, you know, the conventional pronouns that we've all known, you know, all of our life. And I feel like that they've really been the one that's led that. So I would go to HRC as a main resource for that type of thing. The other thing too, I would mention, you know, oftentimes understanding how to properly interact with this community, you can rely on the media vendors that are out there, because they will really be a resource for you. You know, two that come to mind for me, Rivendell Marketing. They represent 97% of LGBTQ media outlets and publishers. Also Pride Media, which is well known for their products, Out, The Advocate, Out Traveler. Those publishers are willing to really sit down and help you understand this community and craft not only advertising, but events and promotions that will really, resonate with these audiences, because they are the experts within these audiences, especially as it relates to advertising and marketing.
I would echo what Laramie said about HRC being a favorite resource of mine. GLAAD also has a good media, I can't think of exactly what they call it, their media resource guide, I think it is. GLAAD is GLAAD. And I think to Laramie's point, listen, be willing. The fact that a brand or a company is asking, how do we get the terminology right? They're already doing the right thing by asking the question. So take it a step further and listen to the experts as Laramie laid out, and be willing to be educated on these matters.
Absolutely. Excellent points. So as a lot of brands are doing it right? A lot of brands have been doing this work for a long time, and especially in this space. Now, what about for brands that are just starting out? I think in 2020, we saw a lot of brands kind of just discovering what DEI was for the first time, right? And a lot of companies trying some things, some being successful, some not, just kind of depending. And a lot of companies are still trying to figure it out. Now, as it pertains to June and Pride Month, kind of coming back to that, if a brand hasn't traditionally done a lot for the LGBTQ community, and they haven't really done a lot of advertising, how can they sort of start while seeming authentic and not simply trying to celebrate Pride Month or doing something that may come off a little bit unauthentic?
I think that's a really interesting question. For me, something that would gain points with me would be, in addition to kind of the rainbow imagery, if the brand or the company also took some time to talk about either the history of the LGBTQ community, the struggles of the community, maybe the history of where Pride originated from, something to show that they're really engaging with the meat of the topic. Another thing that always gets credibility points with me, and it's something that Bob talked about at the top of the hour, is donating all of the proceeds or a portion of the proceeds from the sales to an LGBTQ supportive nonprofit like the Trevor Project, something like that. Put some skin in the game, put your money where your mouth is. That gets points with me.
Right. I totally agree with Rebecca. It's putting your skin in the game, and by associating yourself with different charities that are out there. That's a really strong way. That also, I think, shows you're authentic about it. And going back a little bit to Pride, I don't want to sound like the anti-Pride June guy, right? Because I'm very pleased with where we've come and the attention that is garnered in June. But if you are a new brand really trying to establish yourself with this community, it's going to be difficult in June, because that's where everybody goes. I'm not saying that you don't use it. Use it as a kickoff, and then have a sustained effort, so that that way you're recognizing the importance of Pride in June, but then you're really showing the audience that you're committed to it by extending it beyond June.
Absolutely. I love that, and extending it beyond June, so kind of starting and then continuing to go, simply so you're really being authentic, and you're not being performative, right? Because it's just doing it in June. It's like, okay, we celebrated Pride Month. What's the next thing, right? That's that performative aspect that we all want to avoid. Right. So thinking about a little bit further, what do we think and I guess it's going to depend on the audience, but what are the LGBTQ audiences expecting from marketers? I don't want to I mean, obviously it's a kind of a general question because everybody kind of has different expectations, but what should marketers kind of generally be on the lookout for?
I think in addition to seeing them reflected in marketing and advertising, this community also wants to see themselves reflected in the makeup of the company, right? That is, I think that's important because again, that just shows the commitment that you're making. It shows that you're authentic. It shows that you're not only trying to reach this audience because they have deep pockets, but you're also trying to staff your company with a team that is reflective of the community. And that goes, certainly beyond LGBTQ plus and just DEI efforts. At the conference I was just recently at, there was one company who has gotten so serious about their DEI efforts that they post a tracker on their website. And it's not always that they're tracking against where they should be on their KPI, but it's just a way for them to put it out there, own it, and know that they're doing what they can to get it where it needs to be.
Sammy, I love that. And that's such a good point because it's been a really big conversation within the AMA community, specifically as it relates to DEI over the past couple of months. It's really establishing benchmarks.
Correct.
Where are we? Where are we right now so that we can track our progress and how we're doing and really how to do that? I think that's huge. And I imagine that's something that you do a lot of too, is tracking progress and getting into data and insights. How frequently would you say that someone should do that, kind of check in and kind of track progress on those types of campaigns?
Ideally, I think quarterly would be great. I mentioned earlier, we do the survey on a biannual basis. One of the things I think that also would drive companies to really embrace this thought is, there's so much research out there that supports the fact that a diverse team is so much more productive. They are able to make decisions faster. I mean, all the things that you would want out of, a team is always even stronger when it is a diverse team. And so, I think that that's another thing that we are putting into our efforts just because, as an agency, you constantly want to be able to interact with markets in a way that is important to them. And just being able to understand that you have folks on your staff, on your team, brand, whatever, that again are reflective of the outside community, just give you a real advantage, to understanding the diversity of the entire marketplace.
If I could jump in on that question, Misty, about what LGBTQ consumers are looking for from brands, I ditto everything that Laramey said. In addition, I think the community is looking for loyalty from the companies. So, let's be honest, we live in the real world. Sometimes LGBTQ marketing is going to get pushback or backlash. And in my opinion, anyway, it's important for the company to kind of stand strong and not be like, oh no, we have to pull the advertising. Oh my goodness. That just alienates the LGBTQ community. It erases the good work that may have been done already. One example of this, it's from a little while ago. I think it was 2014. Honey Maid put out an advertising campaign about wholesome families or so family wholesomeness, something like that. And they showed diverse families. And one of the instances was a same-sex couple with children. And there was some backlash. There were boycotts. They got some nasty Twitter comments and nasty emails. They took and made a new advertisement. They took printouts of the negative Twitter comments and the negative emails, and they videotaped two artists making a piece of artwork out of the paper that spelled the word love. So
love
they kind of doubled down
Yeah.
after they got a backlash.
Mhm.
And I was like, I like that.
That's
I like
love
that a lot.
that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Really brilliant.
It is. Yeah. Even as a marketer, I love when I see things like that because it endears me to that brand so much more. I'm like, yes, like really stick for what you believe in, love what you believe in, and keep going no matter what, because that's the way that we create change, right? Like if we pander to backlash and to people saying, oh, I don't like that, I don't want to see that, or what have you in these ad campaigns, then we never get anywhere, right? So it's about, to your point, really sticking to your guns and saying, hey, this is what our company believes in, and this is what our brand stands for.
Right.
I love it. So kind of thinking about internally now, to your point, you know, externally, sometimes there's going to be some backlash. What happens when there's internal backlash? What happens if you have employees that want to start these sorts of campaigns and really want to do a lot more in the way of DEI for their organization, but it's not necessarily understood at a high level, or there's pushback at a high level? Rebecca, since you're kind of in that training space, what would you recommend that employees or marketers, as the case may be, do about that?
That's a really rich question. It's difficult if there's pushback or lack of buy-in from the top. I think Laramey kind of gave us the answer when he talked about the business case for diversity. Ideally, in a perfect world, we would love it if companies do engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion work just because it's the right thing to do. The world doesn't always work that way. So I think pointing to the business case for diversity is a great way to try to get those who are hesitant, especially at the top, a great way to try to get them, you know, sort of hooked in.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree. And, you know, it's unfortunate that sometimes you have to lead with, you know, the buying power and those kinds of things. But honestly, you know, if you are the one that is, you know, bringing this to the top and making them aware of it, then, you know, that's if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. But, you know, I think that, you know, not only with that buying power, and Rebecca really mentioned this earlier, it is a fiercely loyal market. And if you do all the things that we've been talking about for this community, they will be long-standing customers and advocates for you. And things like what you had mentioned, Rebecca, with the Honey Maid, I mean, that is just one of the things that is going to endear that community that much more to that particular brand, because they stood up and did something about the negativity that was coming out of that. So, you know, again, it is an audience that most marketers would really just, you know, crave to have, but they've just got to approach it and do it in the right way, and then they'll reap the benefits.
Absolutely. The power of data, the power of brand loyalty, right? Like speaking to my heart. I love it. So y'all, I'm going to open this up. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm going to open it up for questions in just a moment, just to give everybody a warning to go ahead and think about all your juicy questions for Laramey and Rebecca. But one more question for you before we do. What's one action that marketers can do today to support the LGBTQ plus community?
Go ahead, Laramey.
No, go ahead. I feel like I've not given you a chance.
Oh gosh, no, you're fine. I was actually going to go ahead and echo something that you said. Look at the other 11 months of the calendar. Take all of that energy and positivity that's focused on Pride and the month of June, and use that, leverage it, use it as a springboard for marketing during the rest of the year. And I would also put in a pitch to be mindful of other kind of holidays in the LGBTQ world. In November, there are, I think it's November 20th, there's a Transgender Day of Remembrance. There's a Transgender Visibility Week in November. So be thinking about other opportunities beyond just June to show that you're plugged into the community holidays.
I think the only thing I would add is I think a good first step would be to become a member of GLAAD, become a member of HRC, become a member of your local LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. You know, not only are you, as Rebecca said, putting some skin in the game, but you're also putting yourself in a position to learn. You're putting yourself in a position to interact with this audience. And, you know, I think oftentimes we do see brands who just dive in head first and make mistakes. So to me, this would be a really smart way to get to know the audience, to interact with the audience, and then take those learnings and that partnership and use it to advance your causes for the LGBTQ community.
Excellent advice, y'all. Thank you. I think, you know, to your point, Laramey, the whole point of all of this is so that we can learn more about each other. We can learn more about this space. We can learn more about our consumers and audience and our community as a whole. And I personally have learned a ton today. I'm so glad this is recorded. I'm totally going back and making notes. This has been amazing. But let's open it up. Eugene, I see that you have your hand raised.
Hi, Gene Barlas from Raleigh. Now, I deal a lot with companies, both startup companies as well as established companies. So I want to come back to, and I believe it was Laramey who was talking about this, polling your employees as to where they land on, I'm assuming, a lot of topics. I'm very curious if either A, an outside company does this for you, because we all know that nothing is anonymous. And I'm also curious if, you know, your companies, whoever it be, their employment general counsel or your employment director has approved this. It seems like this could lead to a whole mess of issues, not just on the topic we're talking about, but on other topics that are private. You know, to me, if you can't ask the question in an interview, you shouldn't be polling your employees about it. So I'm really curious about that other side that I just see as being able to cause problems.
Yeah, well, and that's a great question. We do not use an outside. We administer it internally. And I would say that there are probably companies out there who it might be more difficult to do with their staff. Fortunately for us, we have a very, how do I say, a very accepting and very close team. You know, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is, you know, we go by GS&F, but our founders named the agency Gish, Sherwood, and Friends. And so there's a lot of emphasis placed on friends. And, you know, there's certainly the ability to opt out if you're not comfortable. But we just felt like it was very important for us to get an understanding of our teams so that we could provide a workplace and an environment that would allow them to thrive. You know, fortunately too, we have just received our 4th year in a row Best Places to Work in Nashville, which I think also is important for us to understand, you know, what individuals need out of a company. So you do make a great point, and there may be, you know, instances where there could be legal ramifications, but we've only seen positive, very positive and appreciative feedback from our staff.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Excellent. Bob, I see you have a question there.
Thanks, Misty. Awesome, ridiculously awesome conversation, Rebecca and Laramey and Misty as the moderator. Laramey, you made a point, and it's been on my mind this whole discussion a lot. Where you work, you mentioned there's 10%, I believe you said, representation with regard to DEI, the topic we're covering today. a lot of companies, probably brands and businesses, don't have the adequate representation with regard to DEI. So they're your words or paraphrasing what you said. I'll ask the follow-up question to what you were saying. How does a brand or business go about staffing internally so that their team is reflective of the community they serve externally? And is it possible to suggest some specific steps? And that could be an AMA chapter as well. As Misty said, AMA is focusing on this topic. Brands and businesses are. The time is now. So what can we all do as entities to make sure we're staffed internally adequately regarding this topic?
It's a great question, and I'm sure Rebecca has thoughts on it as well. But what I would say is that you're never done. You know what I mean? We are constantly challenging ourselves against metrics to really make sure that we are putting every effort that we can against DEI. It's not an easy task, especially in our industry. The advertising industry as a whole has not really had the opportunity to become as diverse as the community. But, you know, we put a lot of intention around talent and hiring. We put a lot of intention around immersing ourselves in different organizations throughout our community to expand our pipeline beyond the traditional ways of recruiting. And honestly, you know, it takes more time, it is more work, but the rewards are worth it, right? I mean, you know, you just have to make an effort, and it's okay if you're not perfect. We know that we're not perfect. You know, we have a lot of work to do as an agency, but I think just making the commitment and putting checks and balances in place as far as KPIs and hiring, you know, that is what we have to do, because it is important for us as marketers in our industry to be much more inclusive across all, you know, multicultural segments.
Here. I agree with you, Laramie, especially what you said about expanding the pipeline. That's hugely important. Looking at hiring practices, looking at practices around how job descriptions are worded. Something else to look at that a lot of companies are looking at now is how or does unconscious bias play into hiring practices? So making sure that companies are mindful of the possible effects of unconscious bias around interviewing and other hiring practices. And also, too, making sure that once you have these wonderful candidates or employees now of different diverse backgrounds, that you're giving them a good environment to work in. So looking at things like establishing ERGs, employee resource groups, having the right kinds of policies. You want to make sure to retain this wonderful diverse talent that you've gone ahead and gotten in.
Right.
Rebecca, I have a question for you. So you run an amazing organization doing lots of great training on a regular basis, right? So I'm curious, from your clients, what's the number one most frequently asked question that you get while you're doing training?
That's so interesting. The number one most frequently asked question, I would say this isn't a specific question, but a topic that I probably get the most questions around is the transgender community. And I welcome those questions because, you know, we're the LGBTQ community. T is there in the acronym. And I think the transgender community is facing, not to get on a soapbox or anything, but the trans community is facing a great deal of discrimination and challenges right now. And I think a lot of people out there, employees of companies that I work with, are they have their hearts in the right place. They're trying to understand the trans community, because sometimes it's a little bit easier to understand lesbian, gay, bi, as opposed to understanding the trans community. So that's probably the topic that I get the most questions about. I get questions about pronouns a lot. And again, those are things that I welcome the opportunity to talk about.
Yeah, really, really good topics there. And I've certainly heard a lot about that myself, just kind of within the AMA realm. So very interesting. Well, Laramey, with you being a part of the industry for 40 years, I've got to know, what is your favorite ad campaign that you've done?
Well, it's actually 37 years. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. For me personally, because this was something that when I started my career in advertising, I never imagined that I would have the opportunity to do. From 2002 to 2012, we were the print agency of record for Bridgestone. And we had a very fantastic progressive client. And he saw the opportunity really coming out of the 2000 census to embark on a multicultural advertising campaign for Bridgestone tires. And one of the segments was LGBTQ. And they were the very first tire manufacturer to ever really properly address that audience. And they did so with us for 10 years. So working with such a well-known, progressive, fantastic brand, and to be able to address, multicultural communities in a very specific way for 10 years has always been and will always be a career highlight for me. We actually, as an agency, won the very first Mosaic Award here in Nashville for the work that we did on that multicultural campaign. So again, just a career highlight for me.
Oh, that's huge. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Very, very cool. Well, and I know we're coming up on time. Does anybody else have any other questions to ask? All right. Well, that is the case. Laramey, Rebecca, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I appreciate y'all so much. We've all learned a ton. We'll have this recording coming out so we can all go back and listen to it again. But thank you so much for joining us. Bob, I'll let you take it from here.